You're listening to Zeros on Heroes with Mike Mercadal.
Hey everybody, welcome to Zeros on Heroes. My name is Mike Mercadal. Thank you so much to everybody who's been listening and liking and sharing and subscribing and writing reviews and following us on social media at Zeros on Heroes and on everything, and following me personally at Mike Mercadal on everything. If you figured out how to spell my name, it's right there in front of you on the thing you're listening to this right now. The live Unsung Heroes show at the Creek in the Cave in Long Island City, Queens, every Thursday at 8 p.m. is so much fun. If you're subscribed to this, you're subscribed to that. If you're not listening to that, what are you doing? It's so much fun. And if you're in the New York area and you have any ounce of curiosity, come to the show. It's a warm, inviting space. We have a ton of fun. The comedians at the Creek are all hilarious, and you can be on the show. And also, you can be drunk if you want to be on the show. I don't know. Drunk people love a microphone. We've gotten a few, but we're ready to rock every Thursday, and you are more than welcome to join us and talk about the next one. I mean, depending on when you're listening to this, but at the time of this recording, the next one is all about Fantastic Beasts, and where to find them is coming out. So Harry Potter, magic, we're going to be talking about all that stuff. We're getting sorted in the houses. It's going to be a good time. But enough about that. This episode is all about Nat Geo Mars. It's this space. It's about mining and colonizing Mars, or at least making an effort to. And it's on season 2. And season 2, at the time of this recording, just dropped their season premiere on the 12th. And it's a solid show in terms of that it combines very much like Prospect. If you heard the Prospect episode, there's a sense of creating the reality, but this is above and beyond. They're going through for scientific accuracy in air quotes, of course, because it's all speculative, but like speculating in the most scientifically accurate way, having the story be told in a way that is not like ripping you out of reality. And it was very interesting the way they did the press room, because not only did they have the showrunners and a few of the actors, but they also had like scientist, futurist and physicist Michio Kaku. I don't know what it was. And Lucianne Wolkowitz, who is an astrobiologist. Like they're consultants on they're consulting on the show, or at least giving their opinions on the show. Andy Weir, who wrote The Martian and has and writes a lot about that specificity of science in fiction, and Dr. Stephen Pasternak, who's a scientific author on Mars as well, and he wrote How We'll Live on Mars, and that's what they base the series on. But it's also got the season 2 is also season 1. It talks all about that the first steps into Mars. Season 2 apparently is about the broadening scope, like the Wild West of what happens when you get different groups of people, disagreeing groups of people. Like, not everyone has a single unified vision. Imagine if that happens on Mars. It's pretty great. The first section of interviews that we got to do was with Andy Weir and Dr. Stephen Pasternak, and they were all having a good time. So it was a fun event for everybody. Take a listen.
Yourselves, I'm assuming.
Yes. Yep. We're mid-flow.
You get a head start.
Yeah.
Go.
That's great. Okay.
I was just trying to think up a manned mission to Mars and the problems that could go wrong, and what happens if this breaks, that breaks, these two things break at the same time. How do you design the mission profile so that the crew doesn't die? And I realized it might make a good story, and kind of that was how I started. So I didn't set out to go like, I'm going to write a book about colonization of Mars. I was just like, hey, this is a neat daydream.
Nice.
Are we going to go this way? I'm not sure.
Go ahead.
I apologize.
In the U.S., we drive on the other side of the road.
For both, I just recently someone posted a picture of from the Curiosity rover, a picture of Earth from that perspective, and the caption on the picture was like, "Everybody in for the group picture." And I always I like comedy. Do you guys use any specific way to get through to people, relate to them on a human level, to broaden their perspective?
Well, Andy used drama really brilliantly. to do it. I happen to believe that you can do it with facts because I think the facts are so amazing, and the difference between Mars and Earth and what we're capable of doing and have been capable of doing for the last 50 years are so fascinating that the facts will actually convince people.
As for me, my main use for humor is to make exposition more palatable. Like when I have to explain a bunch of detailed science to the reader. I mean, nobody wants to stop their action novel to read a Wikipedia article, right? So just throw in some jokes and the readers will forgive you for anything. Make them laugh. Make it.
So my question is about how much research goes, in my mind, we're talking like years of research that have to go into it, because when you're watching shows, movies, reading the books, I feel like, and maybe this is the intent, that the line between fact and fiction can be blurred. So how do you straddle that line, and how much research do you put into
Well, as far as the Nat Geo series, all the fictional material was based on factual research. In other words, we tried extremely hard not to do anything or say anything in the series that wasn't based on known fact that we should be able to do.
I had nothing to do with the creative side of the series. I'm only there in the nonfiction interview portions. So I had nothing to do with the creative side. But for my personal writing approach, I'm really heavily focused on accurate science, and the research is pretty significant. But for me, that's the fun part. I love looking this stuff up, and people think I have this Rolodex full of NASA phone numbers and stuff like that. But it's really I just Google for everything. Google answers me in 0.002 seconds, whereas a NASA guy would take 3 days.
So I guess I'll piggyback a little bit.
Are you Mike or Slade? We don't even know.
You'll find out.
Okay.
So I'll piggyback on that a little bit with how scientifically accurate you make this show. Has there ever been anything, either in the show or in your personal writing, that you really wanted to do but you couldn't get there, or something that you thought maybe also on the other side that you connected the dots in such a way you're like, oh, look what I just created, essentially?
Well, we had about 5 different scenarios for the captain of the spaceship dying on the going to Mars, and basically the script writers wouldn't buy any of them. So there's a lot of give and take here. When the Lucrum team gets to Mars, the whole concept of why they're there and how they're there and what they're doing, and the tension that's in that is based on some slightly sketchy stuff. So we took some chances. We guessed that liquid water would be found on Mars, and between the time we ended shooting and the time it will be shown, liquid water has been found on Mars. We guessed that there's probably some tectonic movement on Mars, some kind of a volcanic movement of some sort still going on Mars, and in the time while we were shooting, in fact, we found out that there are earthquakes on Mars, although they're not severe. So you walk right up to the edge of the facts in trying to satisfy the people who are trying to write drama that will keep the viewers interested in the program.
For me, it's always I really, really don't want to deviate from scientific accuracy. So sometimes I come up with cool plot ideas and the science says nope, can't do that. But other times I go way down the rabbit hole on the science and it creates plots for me that I didn't even realize. Like when I wrote The Martian, that was before we knew there was so much water on Mars. So at the time I wrote it, we thought it was this arid nothingness. And I'm oh, he's going to need a lot of water to grow those plants. So that's a problem. And I did the math on that, and that's what created that plot point. But in terms of just straight up cheating, a windstorm on Mars could not possibly knock over a spacecraft. It's just it can barely knock over a piece of paper. So I just said yeah, nobody cares.
Or if they do, they'll go fact check you.
Yeah.
They got to get there to fact check you.
Mm-hmm. Since the show premiered to now, there have been more shows and movies about going to space. And do you feel like there's a renewal of interest in space travel? an actual colonization?
I think there is. I think there's a virtuous cycle, the opposite of a vicious cycle, right? A virtuous cycle when it comes to space travel, the entertainment industry, and then space funding. So basically, when the entertainment industry amps up shows and stuff about real space travel, public interest in it increases. Public interest in it increasing leads to more funding for both private and public space ventures. Private and public space ventures accomplishing things also increases interest, and it also drives demand for more space shows. So it just kind of goes around in a circle that's good for everybody. That's my opinion.
I'm very grateful to Andy for doing The Martian because I gave a TED Talk about going to Mars and only about half the people in the room believed me. And about 3 months later, the movie came out, and then all I got was stuff from people at TED saying, "Whoa, you were right. This is amazing." It's obviously true since they made a movie about it. Yes. The movie Gravity and the movie The Martian and the movie Interstellar, I think, have moved the needle on people accepting the idea that we can get off this planet in ways that probably all the scientific literature in the world could never have done. So I'm very grateful to the media, to the public media, for having done this.
And I'm very grateful to 20th Century Fox for making a $100 million advertisement for my book. It sold like a lot of copies because of that. So I'm like super stoked.
I read the book before the movie. I just want to say that.
Before it was cool.
Yeah.
Excellent. Hipster.
So, in all the research, and you said you're all factually based, like everything you've done is completely factual. With all the research that you've done and all the stuff you've seen, most of it. But what is like the most likely way you think we'll get to Mars at this point using current technology or technology that you've seen, that you've come up through your research that we may be able to use better than just like solid fuel rocketry and all that?
Well, NASA has all the technology they need to get to Mars. They just have no plans to actually land people on Mars. They have sort of sketchy plans to fly around Mars sometime in the 2030s. I think if Elon Musk stays alive and if he gets as much money out of Tesla as he hopes to get out of Tesla, that he will build a rocket that will get people to Mars. And I think a private company is more likely to land on Mars before a public venture does. And that will probably happen before 2030.
I guess I hold the opposite view. I don't see a private company beating a government entity to be the first humans on Mars, because once the price gets low enough that a private company can do it, a government will contract the private company for all the parts necessary to do it. And I mean, there's a point at which the price gets down to where governments can afford it and private entities can't, and then it gets driven down further. I think we will eventually have private entities going to Mars, but I suspect the government will be first. As for Elon Musk, I don't believe SpaceX is going to go to Mars anytime soon. I think, however, that SpaceX will be very successful in driving down the price to low Earth orbit, which will enable large coalitions of multiple governments to do a flags and footprints mission. Now, we can talk forever about how flags and footprint style missions aren't really that useful, but we're just talking about the first humans that get to Mars for this question, and so that's my answer.
And once they cross that Rubicon, then...
One more question.
Okay, well then...
Thank you.
I want someone else to...
It's a British thing.
Yeah.
I don't know what it is. You're talking about getting to low Earth orbit. You're talking about everything rocket-based so far. We watch science fiction films like Elysium, like 2001, and we see enormous space stations in orbit. And there's been a lot of talk recently in the press because of an experiment that's taking place aboard the ISS by the Japanese to basically test a scaled-down space elevator. Do you think space elevators are actually going to be the way forward in moving people and payloads into geostationary orbit to build the next level of space stations?
I believe absolutely a space elevator is going to be the big quantum leap in technology that gets us routinely into space. However, I don't think a space elevator will be invented before we have Mars missions. I just think that the materials technology isn't there. We're almost there, but I think it's actually easier right now to go to Mars with our current technology than it is to invent a space elevator. But I do believe in the future, the space elevator is going to be the thing. We're talking about $25 a kilogram to get into low Earth orbit. It'll be amazing.
I agree with Andy that we're much more likely to get to Mars before we build a space elevator. The big problem is the wire or the cable. You know, as Musk is famous for saying, you know, show me something that can't be cut in half by a 50-cent piece of space debris, and I'll be happy to build it.
There are significant breakthroughs going on in that field at the moment.
Yeah, well, good luck.
Yeah.
Good luck.
They're working on it.
Remember, it goes all the way up. It goes through the debris fields. It will be hit by debris.
Yeah. The idea is you need redundancy, blah, blah, blah.
It's a nice idea. I doubt it that we will see it in our lifetimes.
Oh, yeah.
Well, the Japanese have a first-generation prototype. They believe they can build a first-generation prototype by 2050.
Yeah,
the Chinese believe they can build a first-generation prototype by 2045.
Well,
we'll be
Japanese,
on Mars before then.
You reckon?
Yeah.
Japanese companies often make pretty bold claims about what they're going to do. Like one of them just a few years ago was talking about paving the moon's equator with solar cells to power all of Earth.
Right.
Yeah, that's also not going to happen in our lifetime.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Pleasure.
Thank you very much.
Throwing shade at a Japanese space company who wants to pave the moon. Yeah, it's like, what a weird beef. Like, yeah, fuck you, space elevators. Get out of here with that shit. Prove it. Well, in all fairness, that's kind of what science is. Prove it. Science is basically a bunch of people who have just been challenging each other to prove it for 2 millennia, which leads us to Mars. Like we're almost there. The next section of interviews is interesting because this guy I've been a huge fan of for a long time, and Dr. Michio Kaku, he's a futurist and physicist, and the guy's job is basically to think about the future, but realistically, there's not a lot of people whose job that is. That's really cool. And Lucianne Walkowitz is she's astrobiology chair of the Kluge Center of the Library of Congress and astronomer at the Adler Planetarium in Chicago. Again, knows what she's talking about. It was thoroughly impressive to me that I got to talk to such like high-minded and forward-thinking and incredibly smart people. I just think of that as a big honor, and it was really nice to kind of sit down and talk to them. That's the next part of the interview.
They're both on-air experts in Mars Season 2.
Professor Kaku.
Yes.
Now, you've talked about, the show obviously is about Mars, and a couple of things. Do you think life isn't sustainable on Mars? But you also, and obviously in the show, there's no Martians. You've talked about you don't want us to meet alien life. What do you think about that? Is it sustainable? Also, why do you not want us to meet alien life?
Well, yes, I think life is sustainable, but you have to meet certain criteria. You have to have a supply of water. You're going to have to melt the ice to get that. You're going to have a supply of energy. You're going to have solar panels to get that. You're going to have a source of shelter. You're going to have to use, for example, lava tubes that are naturally occurring, caves, to provide shelter for the astronauts. And then you have to have food, which means eventually you're going to have to genetically modify algae and things like that to create a new breed of species that can thrive on the atmosphere of Mars. So if self-sustainability is the key, you have to have food, you have to have shelter, you have to have water, you have to have these basic ingredients to be self-sufficient. And then the question is, are we going to meet aliens on Mars? I hope so. I really hope so. But I think the probability of that is very close to zero. We've looked everywhere. I've talked to astronomers who say that they're not covering up the existence of aliens because they would become famous if they found an alien species on Mars. But I think it's inevitable we will one day encounter intelligent life in outer space. Maybe in this century. We're listening to stars everywhere, and so far we see no discernible signal of intelligent life, but I think it's inevitable that we will eventually make contact with an intelligent species in outer space. But then the last question is, why don't they land on the White House lawn and advertise their existence? Well, my attitude is, if you walk in a forest and you meet a squirrel, do you try to talk to the squirrel? Do you try to talk to the deer? No, because they don't talk back to you, and you lose interest after a while. Well, we are like the squirrels and the deers, so that's why they don't land in the White House lawn. We're not interesting. Sorry about that.
Plus, they know it's already occupied.
My name is Mike. I'm from Zeros on Heroes, podcast nerd related. We're here at New York Comic Con. One of the things that I've always been really interested in is how when we get to space exploration, deep space, we will be genetically different through generations over time, like big picture. So by the time we do colonize Mars, will we then have superpowers? Is that where it finally happens?
That's a good question. I'm not sure that maybe living on Mars for a long period of time would actually create some of those genetic changes. One of the big unknowns for any kind of long-term space travel, whether it's like out into deep space or whether it's on Mars, is that we really have no idea of what happens to the human body. So you probably heard about the Kelly twins who just did this experiment where one twin stayed on Earth, one twin stayed up for a full year on the ISS, and they're actually just now getting ready to publish all of the genetic changes. So even in these two people these two underachieving twins who both became astronauts.
The average Joes, hope for us all.
We do see that there are different genetic changes in their genome, but the question is that a good thing or a bad thing? Some genetic changes are not great. You could end up with more cancers, more birth defects. We just don't know. We know that the environment on Mars is super high radiation, and in the comics that usually results in superpowers, but
your Incredible Hulks and such. The thing. One of my favorite stories is the John Carter from Mars story, where it talks about the gravity being different. Would that a species that lives and grows and develops through that lower gravity, that's all big picture also for Mars colonization as well?
Yeah, definitely. Every one of our astronauts that goes to space and comes back even if they're young and healthy with osteoporosis, because your bone density goes down. So if you were to grow in an environment with lower gravity, maybe you'd have weaker bones. But then maybe that means that the first people that go and live on Mars will actually have super strong bones by comparison, because they will have the densest bones that will ever exist on Mars.
I didn't mean to bring it all down. I'm sorry, that was a real bummer.
Well, I'll bring it down even further with so one of the worst movies I've ever seen is called The Titan. And it's about adapting humans to live on Titan, one of the Jupiter's moons. Yeah, that was horrible. It was horrible. But I'm bringing it up because I want to hear. I know we're focused on Mars, but I want to hear about where you think are the most hospitable environments for humans to travel to. And are we looking at Mars simply because of the distance and temperature and things that we feel like we can overcome at this point? Or are there other places that we feel are more hospitable to what we require?
Well, I think we're going to go to Mars by default. Venus is our evil twin, for example. Temperatures are up to 900 degrees Fahrenheit. That's the inside of a baker's oven. You don't want to be on Venus or Mercury. And Jupiter and Saturn, the gas giants, have no solid surface. Titan, you mentioned, and Enceladus, Europa are possibilities, but it's very cold. They're frozen solid, and they have a liquid ocean, we think, underneath the ice cover, but it's really cold that far from the sun, and they have very, very low gravity. So I think as far as our solar system is concerned, Mars is by default the place of choice. Now, once we have starships, perhaps in another 100, 200 years, then we may go to Proxima Centauri. And then it's a whole new ball game once we start to go to the stars. But I think for our solar system, Mars is pretty much it. And as was mentioned, we may have to genetically modify ourselves to metabolize oxygen, lower oxygen content. Temperatures are going to be lower, requiring less water. We may have to genetically modify ourselves, and also maybe even cybernetically modify ourselves as well, so that one day, if we meet aliens from outer space in a flying saucer, they may actually be genetically and cybernetically modified to withstand the rigors of interstellar travel. They may look like an ordinary alien, but inside, but inside they may be genetically and cybernetically altered to withstand radiation, weightlessness, genetic mutations, and so on and so forth.
So a little more lighthearted. So there's some other scientists who kind of publicly talk about their nitpicks, some science fiction films and things like that. Are there any that you have that are like guilty pleasures? Like, what are your favorite science fiction shows, movies, TV shows, even if they're totally not plausible? What are there any that you really like?
Specifically about space, or just broadly sci-fi?
Broadly sci-fi.
I've been watching Maniac, and I love it. And it's totally like a Terry Gilliam-esque world of, mixing people's brainwaves together, very campy, not at all sciencey, and it's awesome.
Well, usually when I see a science fiction movie, initially I cringe because they get all the laws of physics wrong.
You have to nitpick it.
This is not my universe that we're talking about. However, when I was a child, I was fascinated by the life of Albert Einstein, but on Saturday mornings, they had Flash Gordon on TV. With Buster Crabbe. I was hooked. I mean, Cities in the Sky, Invisibility, all the stuff that became Star Wars. Star Wars is a clone of Flash Gordon. And George Lucas even admitted that. So ever since then, I've been a science fiction junkie. I've watched everything. I cringe all the time. But hey, it's fantasy, Get off your high horse. I mean, it's fun. And science fiction inspired many of the great scientists of the world. Edwin Hubble, the greatest astronomer of the last century, was inspired by Jules Verne to leave his career as a country lawyer to go to the University of Chicago, get a PhD in astronomy, and discover the expanding universe. Many of the great scientists of the world were inspired by science fiction. Carl Sagan was inspired by the John Carter of Mars series by Edgar Rice Burroughs. That's why he decided to become an astronomer to chase Dejah-Thoris on the sands of Mars. So there's a cross-fertilization there. So initially we cringe, but hey, it's fantasy.
Yeah, I think that it's important for people to realize that, science is not some, topic that is, outside the reach of everybody who doesn't, know intimately the laws of physics. And that's what I think is at the heart of people nitpicking science fiction, is that it's this way of making science fiction kind of exclusive, but space is, I think, for everybody. And so as a topic for making art, whether it's film or poetry or science fiction, I think that we have to be a little bit flexible and not just tear it apart because it isn't science fact all the time. One of my favorite movies is actually The American Astronaut, which is a super lo-fi, space cowboy movie that has absolutely nothing to do with anything about being an astronaut or other planets or anything, but it's awesome and
fun to watch.
Yeah.
Thank you, guys.
I wonder, do you have any personal theories about this space travel that you would like to see in this show, or maybe another movie or another show?
Personal theories about space travel.
This whole topic.
Well, you've worked a lot on the 100-year Starship, haven't you?
Yeah. Well, to me, this is just the beginning, sort of like Columbus with his rickety ship going across the Atlantic Ocean. You kind of wonder, how did he do that? How do you go across the Atlantic Ocean on 3 leaky boats that later sink because they're not seaworthy at all? Would you want to go on the Nina and the Santa Maria knowing that they're going to eventually be sunk? So I think when we look back at it, we realize how primitive things are and how great things are going to be in the future. Your cell phone has more computer power than all of NASA in 1969 when we put 2 men on the moon. So I say it was criminal. It was criminal in 1969 when we shot astronauts into space backed up by 1 cell phone. But that's all they had back in 1969, the power of 1 cell phone. So I think that bigger and better things await us. And as was mentioned, some of us believe that in a 100-year time frame, we may have the first Starship. Stephen Hawking was invested in the Breakthrough Starship program to put a chip on the nearest star in 20 years traveling at 20% the speed of light. So I think the next step beyond this could be to build a starship.
I think that point about Breakthrough Starshot is an interesting one, because I work on the Breakthrough Listen project, which is the like SETI side of the Breakthrough stuff, and I always think it's funny to think about what it might be like for another civilization to be like minding its own business when a microchip traveling at 20% of the speed of light shoots through its system. If you think about like what the reaction to Sputnik was, just for like a little ball that had some antennas and beeped, went around the Earth at a perfectly reasonable speed.
The aliens are going to fly swatter.
Yeah.
And swat that chip.
We have time for one more question, please. Thank you.
Go ahead.
Okay. All right. So if we do go to Mars, right, and we do start building a civilization there, we've done a lot to this planet. What do you think the most important lessons are we should take to another planet when we start, terraforming and start creating a new civilization there, or migrating a civilization there? Because we've got a lot of things that we need to fix.
Because we're jumping, I'm going to tag on because my question is very similar. Do you think the civilization on Mars would actually grow apart from the civilization on Earth, like we've seen in The Expanse, like we saw in Babylon 5, this kind of thing, and declare its own independence, for instance?
Yeah, I think one thing to think about is this intersection with our ideas about what we can do to Mars and environmental science here on Earth. A lot of the ideas about terraforming that are out there basically amount to like global strip mining operations, and we can see very clearly here on our own Earth the damage that we've brought to our own environments, places that we would perhaps have otherwise liked to live or at least visit by things like strip mining. So when we look at something like terraforming, for me, as a scientist who's deeply invested in figuring out whether there was life on Mars or there might still be life today, terraforming represents like the ruination of the ability to answer that question. You cannot terraform Mars and also investigate its history. It's over. Because you're making a giant change to the like chemical and biological balance of the planet. So, I think that certainly living on Mars in a more contained environment, that's much more, I think, feasible anyway, because we're like reverse terraforming this planet already anyhow. So we clearly don't know how to control our environment. So we might still yet live on Mars. And in that case, certainly at the beginning stages where we're trying to depend on the Earth, the Earth is a far more habitable place than Mars will ever be. And so we'll still be dependent on Earth for things like supplies. But if it ever comes to a point in which the settlement on Mars is truly independent in terms of its food, its water, etc., then sure, I think that they would naturally grow apart just, by distance alone. You could do essentially anything as a Martian, and it would be a very long time until somebody ever got to you couldn't.
Well, speaking about humanity spreading out, this actually happened 70,000 years ago. 70,000 years ago, we had an event that destroyed almost every single Homo sapien on the planet Earth. Only a few hundred of us escaped that catastrophe. Probably the Toba volcano in Indonesia that blew up. From that small group of maybe 100 people, the entire human race outside Africa was formed, the Great Diaspora. Now, we may be undergoing a second Great Diaspora, like what happened 70,000 years ago, when we go to Mars. And we have starships that go at sublight speed to different parts of the universe. Now, what happened is, well, of course, then we invented the jet plane. Now we can meet other humans who left us 70,000 years ago and reconnect after the Great Diaspora. I think that's going to happen to us once we get warp drive. We're not going to get warp drive for many, many centuries, right? But I think until then, we could have a Great Diaspora, like what happened 70,000 years ago, different settlements on different star systems until we develop hyperdrive. At that point, we're going to reconnect with the human species after the Great Diaspora, like we today are connecting with jet airplanes with other humans that separated from us 70,000 years ago. So I think history is going to repeat itself.
Can we get a quick picture with you guys?
Thank you very much. Man, those people are so smart. Good Lord. Michio Kaku's talking about a hyperdrive ship, like a starship, in the way that, like, for me, it's a fantasy that, that one day I'll have enough money to buy a Lamborghini, right? He's talking about how one day science is going to have a hyperdrive starship. It's like, I understand a Lamborghini is real. To him, hyperdrive starships are the same level of real. Like, he's like, yeah, we just don't have it yet. That's fascinating to me. And Lucian Walkowicz, like, talking about, imagine your job is to get to. These guys are so smart, man. These guys, it was so. I could have listened to talk. I could have listened to them talk forever. I want to go to the Hayden Planetarium right now. The Museum of Natural History, American Museum of Natural History, Hayden Planetarium. I want to go right now. I want to see some space stuff. Man, that was fun. I would listen to them forever. The next section of interviews was actually, it's interesting. You go from these lofty science minds to the actors in the show kind of know their role. They've embraced that other people are thinking about all of this science and logic and creating the world around them with such intensity that they get to play around in. And you can kind of hear they were just not the stars of this press room. The science minds were clearly the stars, and they were just they seemed so appreciative to be there. It was really interesting. We talked to Jihai, and we talked to Jeff Hefner, and we talked to Evan Hall, and the actors, they get it. They get it, and look, I'll be honest with you, they were having some fun with it too.
It was a genuine honor.
Cool is that? You guys are much more high tech over here.
This panel just got fucking interesting.
That's amazing. So what can you guys tell us?
I can tell you my back is killing me. You mean about the show?
About the show, we expect for season 2.
Who wants it?
What's the question?
What do we expect for season 2? Like any?
You're a physicist, right?
Yes, we are.
Season 2, I think you were going to build off the group that's already there, has established a community, a colony, and then some interlopers come in. Then we represent business. We represent the next phase of what's going to happen on Mars. We're going to come and we're going to look for water specifically. We're going to take part in helping them terraform and move some of their science forward potentially. But I think it's the next step in the evolution of what happens once we're there. How do we make money off of it? How do we make it bigger? How do people on Earth benefit? How do we screw it up?
Yeah.
Which we all know. We know how
we're good at that.
Yeah. Spoiler.
Yeah, it's really about the conflict of ideology there between understanding this thing that we've just gotten to and then trying to figure out how to make money off of it, basically, which I think is something that you see happen on Earth a lot. We discover something and then someone's like, how do we make money off of this?
Which is such a bizarre thing, right? Why do we all instantly have to be like, well, how can I monetize this? How can I make this mine, make everybody else want it, and then lord over them that I haven't? It's such a very human thing that we constantly do. I think this is just another look at it.
It's hard too because it doesn't give people time to understand. Like, we're dealing with plastics. We were just talking about plastics and how that was a discovery. Somebody created that and understood it, and then someone immediately started utilizing it and selling it. And now we're realizing that it's causing all of this harm in the ocean and various places on the planet.
But you could watch a plastics commercial and they tell you all these great things that plastics do. You're like, oh yeah, you know what? You kind of need them. You know what I mean? So you got to wrestle with both sides of it. I think this season gives you the opportunity to wrestle with both sides.
Well, that's an interesting question. Is the marketing of space travel that's because you're marketing of plastics? It's this is what we get out of it, and then you kind of play down the dangers of it. Is that to increase? This is essentially a fictional show about a potential non-fiction future, with that idea. What would the sales pitch for Mars tourism be?
We'll remember it for you also.
Well, I mean, there's a great. I'm sure there's a great
New beginning.
one-liner.
Oh, okay.
New beginning.
New beginning.
Already, yeah, he's going to go trademark half of the things that we're. But no, to your.
You're onto my plan. Oh no.
But I think that, there's already companies that do this. There's a company that has raised a bunch of money, and I wish I knew what it was, but they're going to put it all on TV. And I think we touch on it a little with the Chinese space station. They have to have cameras going 24 hours. That's how they're paying for it. They're using it as a TV show.
Well, television is a marketing
That's all it is.
tool. You know what I mean? Television was invented because they were like, oh, we're losing out on all this ad money from movies because they're done already. And then so television became a marketing kind of thing. So it's like a shame. It's like a weird dark spot on all of advancement is someone had to fund it, you know?
Yeah.
So it's like a Truman Show. You're saying that like when you go up there, we'll have like a Truman Show-esque kind of.
I'm saying we're in a Truman Show right now.
Oh, right now.
Right now. This is a Truman Show.
This makes sense.
Yeah.
But no, I mean, as actors.
Oh wow, yeah, you're right.
How did you say that? Oh my God.
Nice place to live.
I think, though, as actors, we deal. I know I've thought about it. It's it is the good and bad of it. It's like you're selling soap all day, and toothpaste, or other plastics or whatever things you may not really care to, but you think that you're doing this artistic endeavor or being part of this really important message. But hold on, let's take a break and sell some Roundup for your grass. You know what I mean? So we, in real life, we're making that balance all the time. And this show and what will happen up there is kind of the same thing. And I think that's what people have to figure out. And then the self-awareness that goes with that is what leads to alcoholism anyway.
Cut to commercial for Johnny Walker.
Right there. Walk boldly or whatever their slogan is. Yes.
Oh, that's it. You nailed it.
Yeah.
You did see Capricorn 1, right? Anyone see that movie, O.J. Simpson? That's kind of Truman Show right there. So I minored in theater in college, so actor to actor. Let's talk method acting when it comes to, I mean, really, how do you prep for a role like this when there's no Mars to go and practice on? Tell me a little bit about what you did to kind of, did you ride the vomit comet? Did you, what were the things?
I wish.
What were the things that you did that sort of got you into that headspace to deliver on these roles?
I think being in a foreign country where you can't read the road signs and you can't understand anything people are talking about. I think just being in a foreign world and a foreign place, and also our studio was an hour away from the city as well, so that gets you in the head of familiarity. And I think for me as a songwriter, I like to be alone a lot, and I, for years just been spending a lot of time alone writing songs, and so it's easy for me to just kind of like get in my zone,
And also they build you a set that's based on what they've been told will be up there, what it's going to be like. And so there's a lot, it's a weird spot to be when you're indoors, you're in somebody's pajamas, or when you're outside, you're in a rubber suit. There's a lot of things you can link your brain to that are really odd, really uncomfortable. And by the time you're on Mars, you're going to have wrestled with things that are more than slightly terrifying so often that I'm sure there's a bravery badge that comes with that, where you just kind of go head first into shit because you've had to. And I think once you do that enough, that you're like, okay, it's like when you're beginning as an actor, you start going to all these auditions, like, this is the dumbest thing you'll ever do in your life. And then you just show up all the time. It's like anything. If you punch me in the head 100 times, I'm a boxer, right? It's like you just get used to this stuff. And I think that you can apply that maybe this is my justification, but like you can apply that up there. Yes, for showing up
You just
hungover.
immerse yourself, and it happens.
Yeah.
I know for me, I had like a really, I don't know about either of you guys, but I only had a week before I had to go. I only knew like a week before I flew out.
That was my first.
Oh, so you weren't you were second choice.
Definitely second choice. They were looking around. No one bit. Brad Pitt was out. Yeah. Ethan Hawke was working. Yeah. So I had like a week, and so I spent an entire day, and I live in the city, so I went to the Hayden Planetarium, but I just spent the entire day just walking around, and got with one of the docents and had him just, I followed him around all day, just asking him different questions. He was really annoyed. Yes, he was. No one would have seen that. He was literally riding around. Come with me.
For the podcast listener,
he's with his hands, and that really helped out because there's so much information out there about all of it, about the astronomy and planets and things, and I started getting like really freaked out, and then I realized kind of that made sense for my character, that there's a fear there.
So you're on a really scientifically literate show, right? So
yes.
There's a lot of facts and things behind all of it. So what's something like that you've learned that you're like, oh, I just gotta go tell somebody this, like my significant other or something, like, oh my God, did you know that Mars is a planet or whatever it is? That you learned?
It's a planet. It's red.
It was red.
You're not learning anything.
We were asked this question earlier, and all three of us were like,
It's been a year.
so dumb.
It's been a year.
Too much fun riding that guy.
It was riding the horse.
There was one thing.
I learned about the Moxie. You
what's
know about
that?
the Moxie?
No, what's that?
The Moxie is a machine created by, I believe, University of Washington. It's a machine that takes carbon and turns it into breathable air.
Oh.
Yeah, it separates carbon monoxide into dioxide into monoxide. One of the two. That thing is insane.
Yeah, and it actually, that's why people can, after the Apollo 13, we had enough, we had the rocket to go to Mars. Just there wasn't very much to figure out how to maintain ourselves up there. But now we can. Now we have things like the Moxie. And there's another machine, I forget what it's called now, that creates water from the atmosphere, that takes air out of the atmosphere.
There's one, too, that is pulling carbon out of the air and using it to 3D print carbon fiber. So you'll be able to carbon fiber, build everything up there just by sucking it out of the air.
Whoa.
I don't know. I made that part up.
Did you make that part?
Yeah. No, I didn't. Actually,
that's how good an actor. I believed it flat out.
But there's
100%.
a couple things I've learned, but I've kind of half learned, and I don't want to say them because then they'll come back like, this guy's completely an idiot. He totally made that up.
You're going to go research it.
Yeah.
That's one of my favorites. We're surrounded by scientific geniuses, and then it's like, there's a thing that uses science.
It's just yell science.
It does the.
It's on a horse.
Let me tell you about these Martian horses.
I mean, there's a new thing that's come out where they've just discovered, like, that I thought was linked to this, about they found the evidence of organic life on Mars recently.
Yes.
And I think that's kind of insane because it goes back to what we're trying to look for.
We live in a world where what surprises us anymore? When you talk about what you've learned, you're like, oh man, you could make up anything, and you're like, no, that actually exists. It's like that carbon thing that jerk actor was talking about. That really does exist. We live in a world. My kids, everything they see, they're like, is that happening now? Like, they can't. Is that real? Like, they can't parse what's real and what isn't because everything looks real. And this show is a good example. It's like you look outside and we're literally out in a parking lot in Budapest, but it looks like we're on Mars. When I saw it, I'm like, you gotta be kidding me. It looks amazing. I don't know what Mars looks like, but that looks amazing. And so when you start to list, when you go and you want to learn things, you want to learn from the scientists and talk to them, it's like they say all these things and you're like, yeah, that's happening, sure. Like nothing's not believable anymore.
I recently learned about a space elevator.
Yeah. They're amazing.
2-3 minutes left.
Okay. Mars has always been the focus of science fiction writers' attention, from H.G. Wells up to Andy Weir. Even the History Channel did a miniseries, Mars, about the group of astronauts that went there. I think one of them dies on the surface, doesn't he? So, what have you read before any of this came along? Had you read any works of science fiction that sort of where Mars was an essential plot point, or even after you got this role, did you then think, right, I'm going to go and read up on this?
I'm reading The High Frontier right now.
Or even, Ray Bradbury's Martian Chronicles as well is another classic example.
I personally did not read anything about Mars. My interest came from beyond corporate structure, but like the employee structure. My idea of going up there as an employee is like, why am I going to do this if it's not just for me? Doing it for my family. Why is this corporation, why am I participating in their wants and ills? And so for me, I'd rather understand why that person is motivated to go there. I don't know how much money you got to pay a dude to do this. It's less about the science. It was about how do I, and want to participate as labor in that environment. It's like, why do you want to send labor there? I'm not a scientist. I have nothing to gain. I can have that job on Earth in some capacity. Why do I do it on Mars? So what kind of cowboy am I in there? So I mean, anything that I read or want to discover would be more about the person's motivation for going along. Mars could be Alabama, for this guy. It's like, why am I digging that hole in that spot?
Personally, would you say you're actually deliberately staying away from it to try and maintain that focus?
From the idea of from the Mars fantasies? Yeah, I think so, because then it becomes fantastical and it gets a little bit away from the direct humanity I want to pour into anything. Because once you get into fantasy, you kind of can be fantastic, and you have to stay focused on. He and I, particularly Evan and I, we're doing a job that is just a labor. It's a one-time. I'm out of here. And get the money and run. And so that mindset to me is more interesting for the character than, holy shit, we're going to Mars.
Yeah, I tried to figure out same. It's very similar. I tried to figure out what would be the monetary benefits for going to this thing. And I remember reading about the fact that the reason why we would want to go to Mars is because it's that much closer to the asteroid belt, which has an insane amount of precious metals that we can utilize. And so if we can build a station that will allow people to travel there and mine in this field, they would be the first gazillionaire.
That's what the Hyperdrive cares about. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, for me, I think it was more. It took me out of this little world that we live in. That seems pretty vast already, but we are literally like the tiniest little dot in this infinite universe, and for us to think that we're the only ones and we're the only special ones, it made me realize how small we are, and how we are one human race, and we are, whether we like it or not, we are one, and we have to work together, and we have to get along. There are certain things like going to space today where it requires all these different nations to participate and cooperate. And we can't do it without Russia, without China, without U.S. cooperating together. So, the one element of the show that contributes to, for me and for, I think, for culture is remembering.
See a quick picture of you? A quick picture of you?
Oh, yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks so much. Thanks, guys. I think the reason we can't answer what we learned on Mars.
Well, it does, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Yes.
Anything I say, I ripped off from any of them.
Thank you.
Man, being a fake Mars explorer sounds so fun. Like a great time these guys were having. No, they were really nice, and everybody seemed like they were having a great time, and really thankful to be on this show that was kind of moving science forward, and it has a great dramatic arc in the first season, and just following on the heels of Prospect last week, there was an idea of seeking fame and fortune, and that's the real draw, like a one-shot, like crab fisherman, go work a season and then dip, that kind of thing. Now and talking about how to make money and the marketing of it, it was very interesting, because I'm still looking for podcast sponsors. So yeah, we live in a world of advertising. Someone's got to fund all this science that was so interesting, and it was also interesting to see how Evan Hall, hearing a week before he had to go start shooting a role where he has to be a space Mars miner. Come on, that's cool. That's pretty solid. But yeah, moving on, we have our next and final section of interviews, which is with the producers, the showrunners, Dee Johnson and Justin Wilkes.
Hello.
Hi.
Hello. How are you?
Very well, thank you. How are you?
I'm good.
Hi, my name is Mike. I'm with Zeros on Heroes. I ask people about their heroes on my show, and you're here, New York Comic-Con. How do you portray heroes that are relatable in that kind of environment? And is there a goal to redeem a negative character or something when they're so isolated on Mars? It's all speculative, but how do you keep it human?
It's a good question. I'd say because this show is a unique blend of both, to your point, documentary and drama, we have heroes in the real world that we were fortunate enough to spend time with, and we also have heroes that are dramatized in our show. And I think in both cases, they are the scientists and the explorers that are out on the front lines that are, in some cases, putting themselves in extreme harm to be able to either report back of environmental issues, science-related issues that could become part of a bigger global conversation. And certainly in the drama, when you've got astronauts who are risking their life and they're going to another planet to establish a beachhead. And you would hope that for anybody watching this, they're going to see heroes that are mostly female, which is actually kind of great, and a few males along the way. And you're going to see what's the potential of humanity when we put our minds to something that's kind of bigger than all of us.
But with an interesting story and to kind of portray the drama as well. Yeah.
Well, one of the things that really I think was so beneficial in having the documentary portion of it and the analogous storylines and characters that our documentary partners found is that they spoke to a lot of the motivations and sacrifices that our fictitious characters were, going through. Their dedication to science or to protest or any of the things that we saw those characters in documentary do. It just sort of helped unpack a lot of that emotionally. A little heavy lifting for us there.
I'm sorry. Oh no, I was just going to ask it this kind of combination of two ways of telling, engaging the viewer. Do you think that there's more promise to that? Like that this could be used for other types of, like a drama based with a documentary?
Aren't they doing that a little bit on the Silicon Valley show, isn't it?
Yeah.
A little bit.
Are.
I think. I haven't seen it. I've heard rumors.
I mean, it's
different.
It's very different, and it was my first time getting involved in something like this when we started season 1, and it was Dee's first time working in this kind of a format. I think that in this case it works because you have real people, real technology. It's based on the premise that humans in real life are going to go to Mars. So you have that as the foundation. And then the drama just really gets to pick up and dive deeper into those stories and ultimately unpack the human experience. I don't know if you can apply that to every other genre of storytelling, but it certainly works for this.
Yeah.
What are some of your biggest production challenges? I mean, it must cost a fortune to film on Mars. I'm kidding. No, but I mean, is it like maintaining accuracy? Is it, getting realistic equipment? What is it? Location scouting. So what is the biggest challenge?
Well, it's a very VFX heavy show, obviously, and I think that makes it difficult. In a way, the stages were not the problem. In terms of accuracy, we have like fantastic production designers who did a ton of research to sort of get it as close as it probably could be. That's all on our stages. I think the hardest part is there's a lot of green screen involved when you're shooting stuff like this. And I think green screen is tricky for anybody. It's hard to be dramatic in front of a big old green screen. And so that's, to me, the most difficult part about it.
Do you ever just, lay awake at night worrying that Neil deGrasse Tyson is going to find a star out of place or something like that?
Because he will.
Luckily, he was a part of the show. So he was on our team. No, like Dee said, we had incredible experts, many of whom we met from the first season, and every story point, every script. I mean, we would get all sorts of notes back then. That literally kept her up at night.
Maddening. The fact checking and hammering. Well, what it really, So we did have to ask. That was challenging and cool though, because it was like we got a ton of information. We got to talk to some really fantastically, knowledgeable people, and really truth always is stranger than fiction anyway. So 9 times out of 10, you'd get stuff from them better than you could probably make up. So.
And a lot of times it's things that people are currently thinking about and currently engineering. Certainly the sort of architecture of a rocket, how are you physically going to get materials and people from Earth to Mars and back again.
But then as you go further into the future, things like, power generation sort of falls into that earlier category, or water. But what are communications going to be like? Are we going to be using virtual reality and holograms? And we were talking about this earlier. If a baby's born on Mars, what happens? There's speculation, but nobody actually knows.
There's very little science on it, actually.
You mentioned communication. When I came over, I said, I really want to ask them if in season 3, are they going to receive a text from President Trump?
A presidential alert.
Yeah. He's elected again. 2042.
It's funny. It is funny. I think that's actually one of the things that would be really difficult. I think that it's getting better, but in season 1, it was established that basically there's no live communication between Earth and Mars because of the distance. So it was like a 20-minute delay, which, if you're just sort of thinking, you're just saying, what did you do today stuff is not a big deal. But if you're dealing with critical, it's happening right now stuff, 20 minutes is a long time to delay. And I think it's like Steven says it's like getting faster, or I don't know how he knows this, but he says it's getting faster. But I think that delay and that the distance, just the pure distance, that there's no one that could get you. The moon, a few days, right? If they had you, but there's no one that's going to save you. You're out there on your own. That's the one thing that was really interesting to me about these 2 colonies. That they are alone. There's no 911. There's no armies. There's no government really there. So how does that work? If there's a conflict, how's that going to work?
What are the main differences or new things you added to this season that we didn't have in the first one?
Well, season 1 was really about humans versus the planet. Can we get there? Can we set up a beachhead there, essentially? Can we lay the groundwork for a future civilization? And while the planet is unleashing all these environmental challenges on our crew, season 2 is really about humans versus humans. Now we are there to an extent. There's a group of people living there, and there's a new group of people who are coming in, and their missions are not aligned necessarily.
Yeah, a little bit humans versus the planet too.
Yeah, and then on top of that, you've got the environmental issues of just living in a harsh place, and I think that's the biggest difference. And it was fun to get to explore those interpersonal dynamics, because you also have people that have been living there. In case of our original crew, close to 10 years, 9 years. What does that do to somebody? You can't go outside. You can't take a deep breath. You've been living under these domes. Psychologically, what does that do? And then when you have this new group of people that are coming in, operating under a different protocol, where's that conflict going to spark up? So it's fun in that sense.
Okay. Thank you. I've forgotten how I was going to read this. Right. So, Elon Musk, God bless him, is sometimes he's a great thing to have around, other times less so. I think it was Elon Musk that actually said that no one would want to go and colonize Mars, because Mars wouldn't get colonized because no one would want to go that far because of all the dangers involved, because it's so far from home and so on. Now, apart from astronauts who train for similar missions, you guys are probably the most qualified people on the planet to be able to have an understanding of what it would be like on Mars, because you've mocked it up. Would you yourselves go?
Not one way.
I'd wait a little bit. I'd wait till I set up a hotel there. Swimming pool.
4 seasons.
A holiday, I would say.
With the shuttle bus,
give it a few more years. I mean, it's going to be harsh. It's going to be incredibly dangerous.
So we got a soft yes and a hard no here, is what I'm sensing.
I know if I knew I could come back. Right. Just to go for in forever or never ever come back at all. A long weekend would be good. I'd be happy with a long weekend. Yeah. But the one thing that, speaking to, just joking aside, that we started talking about terraforming. That was one of the things that was happening in our season here, and the idea that, some people think you can terraform it, some people don't, but I think the idea is that it might take 100 years, but it could get to a place where it was less hostile for people to live. And this is just basically ground floor stuff in terms of what Lucrum's bringing to the table and what the scientists are doing. So in 100 years, maybe my grandkids would have a better time there than I would currently.
Thank you very much. So would the producers of Nat Geo Mars go to Mars? Hard maybe, apparently. Hard, honestly, same. I don't know. Hard maybe. I would love to be a part of a scientific expedition and being on the forefront of discovery, but also it's scary. Will I get back? That's a good question. Excellent qualifier. One-way trip? No, thank you. But it also takes months to get. Oh, the reality of it is so interesting. I would love to go. Honestly, I've looked into it. I cannot be an astronaut. My skeleton is too large. I am too big. I am a large man, and apparently that's more expensive to send into space. So once again, foiled by the double-edged sword of having a large skeleton. This episode was so much fun to sit in that press room, and man, I never thought I'd get the chance to talk to Michio Kaku. What a legend that guy is. Super smart, and just felt smarter just being around him. And Lucianne Wolkowitz and she was brilliant as well, and they all seemed super down. Like, they seemed super chill. Like, when you're that smart, I guess everything is like, yeah, whatever, man. Hey, it seemed pretty cool. And the actors were having a great time. And Andy Weir and Stephen Pasternak. Andy Weir, I love that guy. Read all his books. The Martian, if you know, The Martian is amazing. But yeah, what a fun episode. And I just love the fact that the show is so science based in reality, this kind of extrapolation of reality into the future. It's a lot of fun. They just premiered their season 2 season premiere just now on the 12th. You can find Nat Geo back episodes. You can watch them there. It's a great show. It really is. Has a documentary component as well, so that you get the real science and then you get the dramatic show, and it's super solid. I mean, I know I'm a space nerd and I keep talking about, this is something I picked because I enjoy it. But it's good, and you should all watch it. I highly recommend. And that's it. That's it for the show. Thank you all for listening. Remember to like, share, and subscribe. Write us a review. Follow us on all the social media, at Zeros on Heroes on everything, at Mike Mercadal on everything. And come out every week, every Thursday at 8 p.m. at the Creek in the Cave in Long Island City, Queens for Unsung Heroes. And you can go follow us. If you follow us on social media, you will learn whatever the topic of the week is for that show, and come out and be ready and talk about movies and nerd stuff and personal stories. And it's a lot of fun with some of the funniest comedians in New York City every Thursday at the Creek in the Cave in Long Island City, Queens. Thank you for listening, everybody. Remember to go out and be heroic.
Calm down.